Morning Varney YouTube. We're in the office and I thought I would try doing a new video format. Eventually, obviously, we'll have guests here or Josh, most likely Josh. I want to talk about the top 10 DIY services that I've done on Ferraris and order them from easiest to hardest.
So are you recording all of the nefarious activities?
If you're new to the channel, my name is Dan and we are at The Stub. This is our dealership, MG Supercars, and this is our office, and we have the new space. So I thought we'd try out doing a video from here and see how y'all like it. If you don't like it, well, feel free to criticize as you will, I'm sure. Let's get right into it and go with the top 10 DIYs that I've done on Ferraris. We'll start off with the easiest and go to the hardest. And I want to point out, so some of these I'm going to say have an asterisk, and it's going to be, the difficulty is, it depends on which car. So we're going to start off with just changing the oil on your Ferrari. Yes, this is usually a very simple task. It is certainly very easy on cars like the 360 and 430. It gets a little bit difficult on the 458 because the under tray doesn't have holes in it where you can just like get access to it. So if you're just doing the oil on a 430 or 360, there's access holes. You can pop out these little plugs and just get in there, and it's actually quite simple. Same with like the Ferrari California and some of the other cars, but the 458 is a pain in the ass. I actually have not changed the oil on a 488 yet, so I can't speak to that car. But yes, we have the original OG footage of me making a horrible mess on the 430. We'll play that clip now. Yeah, I know. Lots of you have seen this footage, and what I would say is you have to be a little bit careful on the 430 because the size of the drain plug is massive, so the oil comes out extremely fast. DIY number 2 that I would say is probably the easiest to do is the sticky buttons. And actually I would say this one takes a little bit of finesse. So the asterisk here, the caveat on this one is it depends just how sticky and how bad it is. If they're really, really sticky, like to the point where when you touch it, it like leaves black crap on your finger, those can actually be kind of tricky because the white lettering and the faces on the sticky buttons can actually come off in order to get all the stickiness off. So if it's very, very light, like just starting to get tacky as opposed to full-on sticky, you can use rubbing alcohol and just clean them up. And I also want to clarify that like this is the cleanup. This is not necessarily recoating them. If you want them to get recoated, you probably need to send them out to a company like Sticky RX, but it takes a while and it's pretty expensive, but it's worth it if you're going to be keeping the car for a long time because the buttons come back and they are in perfect condition. You also have to consider then you have to take the buttons apart and get them all separated and all that stuff, so there's a bit more complicated stuff in it in that particular case, but generally speaking, sticky stuff, pretty easy to take care of. Item number 3 would be brakes. So brakes on these cars are very simple to deal with. They're pretty much all Brembos, and Brembo makes the pads really easy to take out. You just kind of pop out those pins and shove the pads out. And as far as changing the brake fluid, you can use a motive to pressurize it. Now obviously if you have where you want to change out the ABS system, you might have to get a computer. Depends on the version of the car you have, how modern it is, and you can go in and actually do like an ABS purge. Generally speaking, changing out the fluid, pretty simple. You gotta remember there's an inner and outer bleeder. You wanna start the furthest location from the master cylinder, so usually that's gonna be the passenger rear side, or at least I would say the right rear side. So right rear side, then left rear side, then right front side, then left front side. I've heard conflicting things. I've heard both to do the inner first and the outer first, but I liked what Josh Hill said, which is you do the inner first because then it will get out any air and no air would go through the caliper. That seems to make sense to me, so do inner then outer. Next up is wheel bearings. These are actually not terribly difficult to change. On most of the Ferraris it's a fully contained unit, or at least on the modern Ferraris. I've only had to change one. I've only had to do it on a 430. It was not a terribly difficult job. It did require the use of an impact gun, a lot of foot-pounds, and a big old nut that is stacked, and unstacking that nut was the only difficult part about it. But the cool thing is because you change out the wheel bearing, you don't have to readjust the suspension or change any of the alignment or anything. It just should come out and go back in. It's going to be more difficult to do a rear one than a front one. A rear one, you're going to have to pull out a drive shaft, front ones, there just comes right out. You can certainly do it in the better part of an afternoon. So number 5 is ball joints. Ball joints are a little bit more effort. They take some more specialty tools, and you have to have the specialty glue and some other stuff, and it's a little bit trickier to do, but generally speaking, not a terrible task. You can certainly do it in a day. If you're doing it solo, I would say you might want to set aside 2 days, like a full weekend, but it's not terrible. And if you're going to have to replace the ball joints, there's aftermarket ones, and again, this is for 430s and 360s. Use the aftermarket Hill Engineering ones. They are substantially better than the OE ones, and they will last a lot longer. But can bake the parts to separate the glue if you need to. Gotta make sure you get some grease over that boot and stuff, and get the little, you need some, what is it, like C-clip pullers or whatever. So a couple specialty tools, but the actual labor itself is not challenging. Oh boy. Next up is valve cover gaskets. So these are pretty difficult. It takes a bit of effort, and it does vary greatly on the different cars. So on the 430 and 360, it's best to remove the A-frame that holds the whole engine and transmission cradle, which means you're gonna have to support the engine and transmission so that they don't wobble around, especially because the A-frame actually connects to the transmission. So you're gonna be pulling out that big trans bolt. You don't have to change out the trans mount at this point. Once you get the A-frame out, they can pop out. On the 458, it's a tight squeeze. It is possible to do it with the engine in place, even though the manual does not say you can. I was able to do it. You have to be extraordinarily careful to not scratch the valve covers if you're doing that way. Yeah, do it at your own risk. I've also done them in the 599. Those were a pain in the butt as well, although not quite as terrible because at least you're in the front engine and there's not as much stuff on the top of the valve covers. That one we had to actually tilt the engine forward to get enough clearance to get the rear of the valve cover in place while the gasket held in place. Biggest tip on that, I would say, is use some RTV sealant and let it dry for about a day. That way it actually holds the gasket in place once you have the valve covers inverted. As long as you do that, yeah. Also, scrub the gaskets before you put them on. That was a tip from Josh Hill, is use brake cleaner and scrub them. It removes this film that's on the gasket. It supposedly helps them seal up a little better. Next up is one of my least favorite jobs that I've done probably the most out of everything on a Ferrari F430 and 360, which is the exhaust. Oh boy, especially those headers. Those headers are just a pain in the ass. Now, sounds crazy, but I've done it enough times that I can actually remove them in about 3 or 4 hours. You have to have some special tools. Like, I mean, I'm not saying special, but you have to have a variety of different, I believe it's 12 millimeter or 13 millimeter, I think it's 12 millimeter wrenches to get those nuts. And man, they're just in all sorts of awkward, weird positions. Your hands are above your head, you're doing all this crazy crap to get them loose. It's a pain in the ass. You want to soak them in penetrating oil if they're stuck. Half the time the stud comes out with them. It takes a lot of patience. Difficult, but not impossible. It just, the first time you do it, it's really a pain in the ass. The second time, it's not so bad, and by the, I don't know, 15th time, like I've done, then it's actually kind of easy. Honestly, maybe I should have swapped that with valve cover gaskets. Next up would be the clutch. So the clutch is actually reasonably easy to change out in these cars. Now the catch is you do have to have a computer to reprogram them if you have an F1 car. If you have a manual transmission car, there's no programming. But the other thing is, if you're going to do the clutch, you're probably doing the throwout bearing and the pilot bearing. So you need a pilot bearing puller, throwout bearing. You have to have the clutch separated far enough to be able to get that separated out. That can be a little bit tricky. Honestly, the biggest thing about doing the clutch on these cars is just there's a lot of other crap that you got to remove in order to get to the clutch. Once you actually get to the clutch replacement is pretty simple. You do need also a clutch alignment tool to just kind of center it. You could easily do a clutch in a day if you've done it before. I would say first time doing it, expect to do it over a weekend. Okay, carbon cleaning's up next. So we cleaned out the carbon on the valves on a 458, and let me tell you, that was a very difficult job. And it's mostly because the effort to get to where you can clean out the valves is a lot of work. Pulling out the intake manifold on the 458 is quite challenging. There's a lot of tricky little bolts and wires and harnesses and all sorts of crap in the way. So it takes about a day to remove the intake manifold and about a day to put it back in. And when we put mine back in, we didn't tighten down one of the ground wires enough, so we actually got some weird errors because of that. So I would say make sure you really tighten all of the ground wires. Make sure you kind of take pictures along the way to to see what you need to put where. As long as you do that, I think you'll be okay. You're going to need some special tools like carbon, like a walnut blaster, or you could do dry ice blasting. And you got to make sure that the valves are closed completely before you do that. Otherwise, you're going to get some of that crap into your oil. Don't want that to happen. So it's probably best to do an oil change afterwards. Carbon clean it, run it for a little bit, then do an oil change. Then you're all set. Number 10 on this list is a manual conversion. It is actually quite challenging. It took us 11 days to do it, and that's working full days, but that's also us documenting it. I think we could do it in a few days now. There's two different ways to do a conversion. One is that you leave the clutch in place and you swap it to use ATF fluid. The other way to do it is you actually change out the clutch and throw-out bearing and all that stuff, and you use brake fluid. I would recommend this method because I feel like if you're going to do it, the brake fluid has a higher boiling point, so I think it's a more effective solution for the clutch. Besides, if you're going to be in there and changing all this stuff, it's a great time to replace the clutch and throw-out bearing and all those other things that can go bad. It's not that it's that difficult, like any particular step was that challenging, it just takes a lot of steps. So plan on taking multiple days. There's going to be some things that are very annoying and take your patience. Calibrating the shift to be perfect, it takes a little bit of effort, but once you get it all dialed in, it's probably the most rewarding thing that we've done on a car this far that was DIY. I would not say to do this if you are uncomfortable taking apart a lot of components on the car. And actually I threw in a bonus one, which is timing belts. So the timing belts on the car, they could be fairly easy or really difficult. So doing just a timing belt slap on the 575 actually turned out to be quite simple. But doing the timing belts on any of the engine out cars is obviously a serious undertaking. So on those, you need to set aside a substantial amount of time, and besides the amount of time and energy to remove the engine and the cradle and all that stuff, just doing the timing belts itself, that's where it's pretty much always worth it to do a full major, not just a belt slap, because if you're taking the effort to pull out the engine and all that stuff, the amount of effort just to get to where you can even do the timing belts, you're talking probably at least 20 hours of work, so you might as well change out all the gaskets and stuff too. Versus on the 575, I felt pretty comfortable doing a belt slap because, well, everything's right there. If we have to end up changing out a gasket later, it's right there. Don't have to pull the engine, don't have to do a whole lot of work. You might have to take off the intake manifold, but that's about it. So substantially easier to do on the front engine cars than the mid engine cars without the access hole. I think doing a timing belt surface on a 360 with the access panel, I would consider doing a belt slap so long as you see no signs of oil leakage and so long as it hasn't been substantially long since the last time we got a full major. But whew, man, sometimes it's just worth paying someone else to do it, but if you want to take that adventure yourself, it is very rewarding when you're done because you're like, yeah, that's right, I did that. I did the major service on my car. I did the timing belts. It's pretty cool. Obviously, if you're dialing in the cams and everything with a dial indicator and a degree wheel and all that stuff, that's a lot more effort than just doing a belt slap. It's up to you how you want to solve that problem, but there you go. There's actually 11, give you the bonus one, 11 DIY services that we've done on cars that were, I would recommend that you can do these things yourself if you're reasonably comfortable with a wrench, but otherwise, hire someone if you're not comfortable. And that's going to do it for this video. So let me know what other DIY stuff you want to see on these cars. We are trying to get more DIY content coming your way now that the shop is almost done. Once we get it operational, we're going to be doing a lot of work on these cars. We'll be filming it and showing you guys as much as we can. So let us know what you want to see. And in the meantime, like, share, and subscribe, and check out our website, normalguysupercar.com and ngsupercars.com. But we'll see you in the next video. It's going to be sweet.